My name is Emily, and if you'd asked me to describe my life a few years ago, I might have said it was like a roller coaster, but roller coasters have their highs. My life, however, felt more like a series of dark, unending drops. It all began when I was 11, a time when most kids were thinking about friends and school, while I was faced with a different reality, one that marked the beginning of a painful, relentless journey. My father had been sick for a long time, battling a disease that drained him of his strength and stole away his laughter. When he passed, it felt like the ground beneath me gave way. My mother, Rachel, a dedicated teacher, tried her best to keep things together, but her grief was suffocating. We lived in a modest home in Austin, Texas, nothing grand, but it had been our sanctuary. After my father's death, it no longer felt like home. I'll never forget how my mother looked after the funeral, pale, exhausted, her face etched with sadness. She was struggling to cope, and I wished more than anything that I could ease her pain, but instead, I felt like I was just one more weight she could barely carry. Not long after my father passed, Rachel met Tom, a man in his early 50s, a construction foreman who brought with him a cold, controlling presence that I couldn't quite grasp. Tom moved in quickly, and it was clear from the start that I didn't fit into his world. He made sure I knew it. Every rule he set felt like a line drawn in the sand, one I was always on the wrong side of. One evening, I spilled juice on the table, and his anger was immediate and intense. My mother, still numb from her grief, didn't defend me. Her silence, paired with Tom's sharp words, left me feeling smaller and smaller in the space we used to call home. As time went on, Tom's resentment toward me grew, especially when my mother became pregnant. When Sophie was born, the tension in the house escalated. Tom grumbled about the extra financial strain, his bitterness simmering just beneath the surface. My mother, overwhelmed by both her grief and the new baby, seemed to have nothing left for me. Then came the day that broke me. Tom suggested I go live with Aunt Martha. I'd heard of Aunt Martha. She was strict, unyielding, and not the kind of person who would coddle anyone. My mother's face twisted with regret, but she didn't fight Tom's decision. It felt like my mother was choosing to send me away, and the sting of abandonment was more than I could bear. Emily, it's for the best, my mother said softly, but the words felt hollow. Aunt Martha will take good care of you. I felt my heart crack. I didn't want to leave my home, my room, the life I knew, but I had no choice. The days that followed were a blur of packing and half-hearted goodbyes. Aunt Martha's house was worlds away from what I'd known, a cold, imposing place on the other side of Austin. She was in her early 60s, retired, and her stern demeanor felt like a constant weight. From the moment I arrived, it was clear I wasn't here to be cared for. I was another task for her to manage. Aunt Martha's house was rigid with rules. Everything had its place, and every action of mine was scrutinized. It felt like I was always being watched, always being judged. She never missed a chance to remind me how my mother had sent me away, and every time she did, the pain deepened. One night, alone and desperate, I found a way to use Aunt Martha's phone to call my mother. I just needed to hear her voice, to ask her why she had sent me away. When Rachel answered, her response was as cold as the silence that had settled between us since Tom came into our lives. "You can't come home, Emily," she said flatly. "It's better this way." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I felt completely rejected, completely alone. I couldn't understand why she had chosen to let me go so easily. Aunt Martha found out about the call and was furious. She responded by tightening her grip, imposing even stricter rules, punishing me for reaching out. My life became a careful balancing act of avoiding conflict and suppressing my emotions to survive. Months passed, and Aunt Martha's patience wore thinner by the day. Then, a year later, she announced that I had to leave. Rachel had stopped sending the financial support she had promised for my stay. With nowhere else to turn, I was sent to live with my grandmother, Carol. What I didn't know then was that this would be the beginning of a new, unexpected chapter in my life. Carol's house was like stepping into a different world, located on the outskirts of Austin. It was cozy and welcoming, a stark contrast to Aunt Martha's cold, imposing house. In her mid-70s, Grandma Carol was a retired nurse with a gentle but firm way about her. She moved with a grace that made her home feel warm and inviting, and for the first time in ages, I was greeted with kindness. Her hug was the first real comfort I'd felt in so long. Carol had a way of making everything feel more manageable. There were rules, of course, structure and routine, but they felt less like punishment and more like a way to bring peace to our lives. "You'll have your own room," she said, showing me around. "I want you to feel at home here." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hope-stirring. Carol treated me with dignity and respect, but she also set clear boundaries. I had my own space, responsibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a valued member of a family. The transition wasn't perfect, but compared to Aunt Martha's house, it was a relief. One of the first things Carol did was enroll me in a new school. I was nervous, but also excited. The change was daunting, but with Grandma's encouragement, I found the confidence to give it my best shot. School became a refuge, a place where I could escape the weight of everything at home. I threw myself into my studies, driven by a new sense of determination. Over time, Carol became more than just a guardian, she became my rock. She never saw me as a burden or a charity case. Instead, she helped me discover my own potential. With her support, I excelled in school and found a passion for engineering. I worked hard, knowing this was my chance to create a future for myself. Though Carol's health was often a concern, she never let it get in the way of caring for me. I took on more responsibilities around the house, from cooking to managing her medication, but the work never felt like a burden. It felt like a small price to pay for the love and security I found in her home. I was determined to care for Grandma Carol the way she had always cared for me. By the time high school rolled around, I was thriving academically. Her unwavering support had been the foundation of my success, and I knew that without her, I wouldn't have made it this far. She encouraged me to pursue my dreams, and I set my sights on becoming an engineer. It was a difficult path, but it felt like the right one. Graduation day was a moment of pride I would never forget. Grandma Carol was there, beaming with pride as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. It was a culmination of years of hard work, and her constant belief in me. I had been accepted into a respected university, and for the first time in my life, the future seemed full of promise. College was a whirlwind: classes, projects, social activities, and working part-time to support myself. It was tough, but I was determined to make it all work. Grandma's letters and occasional visits were my lifelines, her reminders of perseverance and hard work keeping me grounded. One day, as I struggled with a particularly difficult engineering project, I received a letter from Grandma Carol. Her words of pride and encouragement were like a hug from afar. They gave me the strength to keep going when I thought I couldn't push through. Years passed, and I graduated with honors. By the time I was 34, I had accomplished what I had set out to do, becoming a successful engineer. The achievement was overwhelming, but there was a sharp sadness too, because Grandma Carol wasn't there to see the fruits of her guidance. She had grown older, her health declining, and I knew time was running out. When Carol passed, the grief hit me harder than I had ever imagined. Losing her felt like losing a part of my very soul. Her funeral was somber, but it also spoke to the love and respect she had earned throughout her life. I took comfort in knowing that she had lived fully, and I cherished the memories we had shared. But the real shock came after the funeral. As I was still mourning, my estranged family resurfaced: my mother, Rachel, Tom, and Sophie, now 22, demanding a share of the $2 million inheritance Grandma Carol had left to me. Their audacity was staggering. After all these years, after everything they had put me through, they were showing up, expecting a piece of what was rightfully mine. Grandma Carol had legally adopted me, so the inheritance was mine alone. But they thought they could just waltz in and take what wasn't theirs. I wasn't about to let them use my grief against me. The confrontation was tense. It felt like an intrusion on my grief, like they were trying to rewrite the past and claim what they thought they were entitled to. I stood my ground. This wasn't about money. It was about respect for the woman who had loved and cared for me when no one else did. The next morning, I woke up to find them already settled in. Rachel, Tom, and Sophie had arrived early and were unpacking their belongings into the rooms Grandma Carol had left behind. It felt like they were treating the house as though it was theirs by right, and I could feel the anger rising in my chest. "Emily, we need to talk," Rachel said, her voice flat, cold, demanding. She was no longer the warm mother I remembered. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. Tom loomed behind her, his presence oppressive, while Sophie looked uncertain but determined. "I don't think there's anything to discuss," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This house, this inheritance, it's mine. Grandma Carol made sure of that. You have no claim to any of it." Rachel's expression hardened. "We're family, Emily. We have a right to share in what Carol left behind. She was my mother too." Tom chimed in. "We've fallen on hard times. We need this. It's only fair that we get something from what's rightfully ours." My anger flared. How dare they come here, after everything, and expect to take what didn't belong to them? You can't just barge in here and claim what isn't yours. I shot back. "Carol legally adopted me. Everything she left is mine. Rachel's eyes narrowed. I can't believe you're being so selfish. We're your family. We deserve a share of that money. It was clear Rachel wasn't going to back down, and neither was Tom. Sophie seemed stuck between them, her discomfort palpable, but she said nothing. I knew I had to stand firm, but every word, every confrontation felt like a weight on my chest. I called a lawyer to ensure that I was legally protected. Grandma Carol had been meticulous about everything, and I needed to make sure her wishes were honored. The lawyer's office was a calm sanctuary amidst the chaos. After reviewing the will, he confirmed that everything was in order. The inheritance was mine, and my family had no legal claim to it. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home, ready to stand my ground. Rachel, Tom, and Sophie were still there, acting as though the house was theirs. I faced them, holding the lawyer's letter in my hand. I've spoken to a lawyer, I said, my voice steady. The will is clear. Everything Carol left is mine. Rachel's face turned bright red with anger. You can't do this, Emily. We're desperate. Don't you have any compassion? I do have compassion, I said, my voice calm but firm. But compassion doesn't mean giving away what isn't mine to give. Grandma Carol wanted me to have this. You had your chance to be part of my life, but you chose not to be there. The tension in the room was suffocating. Tom was glaring, and Rachel was seething with frustration. Sophie seemed hesitant, as if she wanted to speak but was too intimidated. Then, things escalated. Tom and Rachel started making threats, insisting they would take what they believed they were entitled to. I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't let them continue to take advantage of my grief and try to claim something that wasn't theirs. I called the police. I explained the situation to the officers, showing them the lawyer's letter and the eviction notice. They listened carefully, and their sympathy was evident. You need to leave, one of them said firmly, looking at Rachel and Tom. You're trespassing. Rachel's face twisted with disbelief and fury. She gathered her things slowly, glaring at me as she spoke through clenched teeth. You haven't heard the last of this, Emily, she spat. We'll be back. Sophie, who had been eerily quiet throughout the ordeal, gave me a sad look before silently following her parents out the door. It was clear she was caught in the middle of the family drama, but her departure didn't make things any easier for me. With them gone, I was left in the silence of the house, where the grief of losing Carol was compounded by the emotional exhaustion of the confrontation with my family. I knew I needed to focus on honoring Carol's memory and moving forward, but the weight of it all was hard to shake. The stress of the situation had taken its toll, but it also reinforced my resolve. I couldn't let my toxic family undo the peace and happiness Carol had worked so hard to give me. It was time to rebuild, to reclaim my life, and to live it on my own terms, no matter what they had tried to take from me. The days following the eviction were a blur of emotions. The house, which had been a battleground just days before, now felt like a peaceful sanctuary. Carol's absence left an unfillable void, but her legacy was clear to me now. She had given me stability, love, and the confidence to build a life for myself, and that was what I intended to honor. The aftermath of the confrontation with my family left me with much to process. Between the shock, the anger, and the grief, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. I found solace in the routines that Carol had established and in the memories of our time together. One of the most important gifts Carol had left me was the freedom to make my own choices. Her life had taught me that I was capable of achieving great things, and I had already started down that path. The $2 million inheritance wasn't just money, it was a symbol of the love and care Carol had for me, a reminder that I had fought for my future, just as she had always supported me in fighting for mine. I decided to use a portion of the inheritance to set up a scholarship fund in Carol's name. The fund would help underprivileged students pursue their dreams, just as Carol had helped me. It felt like the perfect way to honor her legacy and give back in a meaningful way. Setting up the scholarship was both a challenging and fulfilling experience. It allowed me to transform the grief of loss into something positive, carrying forward Carol's spirit of generosity and support. As time passed, I focused on rebuilding my life and moving forward with my career as an engineer, a profession I had worked tirelessly to establish. My professional success felt like a tribute to Carol's belief in me and my own determination. I also made sure to nurture the friendships and relationships that were meaningful to me. I built a genuine support network of people who cared about me, people who offered the love and connection I had always longed for. Though the pain of my family's actions still lingered, it no longer felt overwhelming. I had learned to protect my peace and my boundaries. The confrontation had taught me the importance of standing firm in my convictions. I had defended the life I had built for myself, and I felt empowered by that strength. Eventually, I came to terms with the situation. I had done everything I could to honor Carol's memory, and her legacy was now in good hands. I kept her memory alive through the scholarship fund, and I often visited her grave, where I talked to her about the progress I had made and the future I was creating. It was my way of staying connected, of sharing my triumphs and struggles, and of feeling her presence in my life. In addition to honoring Carol, I set new goals for myself. I had always put certain dreams on hold, and now I was determined to explore them. I began traveling more, taking on hobbies I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. Every new experience felt like a tribute to Carol, a celebration of the life she had given me, and a way to continue growing as a person. Looking back, my journey is a testament to resilience and the power of finding one's own path. I overcame adversity, and I learned to thrive despite the challenges. My story is about finding belonging and creating a meaningful life, a life full of purpose, love, and growth. In the end, my journey wasn't just about facing the fallout from my family's actions. It was about embracing the future and living a life that honored the values and love Carol had instilled in me. I had faced abandonment, hardship, and loss, but I had emerged stronger, more determined to live a life that was true to myself. As I look ahead now, I feel a sense of peace and hope. I know that no matter what challenges come my way, I have the strength and resilience to face them head-on. My story is a reminder that, even in the face of adversity, it's possible to find belonging, build a meaningful life, and honor the legacy of those who have shaped us.